I think I need to replace my disc brake pads. So my rear brake pad is super squeaky right now, and the pad is also really worn down. I'm gonna show you how to replace the pad and also clean up your router to make it a lot less squeaky. It's important to change your brake pads at the right time, otherwise you can damage your router, which is this thing. And that will cost you a pretty penny to replace. Before we can get started, we need to do two things. The first is figure out which specific brake pads we actually need. I suggest heading to Google and figuring out which specific pads are compatible with your specific brakes. There are numerous different brake pad standards, so do not just go with a brake pad that has the same brand name as your brakes. If you are unsure, I recommend going to a local bike shop and asking them for help. Secondly, we need to get the correct tools ready. The items we need are, of course, replacement pads, a flathead screwdriver, or a disc brake piston press tool. Needle nose pliers can come in handy, as well as isopropyl alcohol to help clean the router, because if we're gonna take the brake pads off, we might as well clean the router while we're doing that. And lastly, you're gonna need just your regular hex wrench that you use to remove your wheel, because we need to take our wheel off as well. So now we can start with the first step, which is simply removing the wheel. I won't explain how to do this because I'm sure you've already figured this step out. Our next step here is to remove the retaining pin from the brakes. Regardless of what type of brakes you have, you're likely just going to need some needle nose pliers and the flathead screwdriver to pull out the retaining pin. So this one has that little cotter or protective pin that I'm going to pull out. Don't want to lose that. And then you can simply just gently take your flathead and screw out this retaining pin. And do not lose any of this stuff because you will need it at the end. Now we can pull out the old brake pads from the brakes. Mine have these cooling pieces here, and most brakes do not have that, but otherwise it's the same for both styles. So you're just gonna pinch and then pull out, just like that. Now let's take a look at to see how worn out these are and to learn a little bit about brake pad wear. Let's take a closer look at the old brake pads. So every brake pad set will come with this clamp that's used to keep the pads in place. And of course there's two pads. These ones, like I said before, have the fins on it for ventilation. Many do not. And if we look at the pads, we can see that there is kind of this oily contamination streaks. And this is likely what's helping cause that squeaking that I want to get rid of. But we should also take a look and see how worn out the pads are. And the general consensus is that there's only less than 1 millimeter of thickness left in the pad, then you should replace it. And 1 millimeter is also the thickness of 3 playing cards. So that's a really easy way of checking. And if we do that, we can see that it's very close enough that it makes sense to just replace these, especially since I have them off now. There might be a little bit of life left, but like I said, because it's making the squeaking, I'm just gonna replace them. Let's open up this brand new disc brake pad box and see what's inside. First off, you'll notice is that I'm wearing medical gloves. That's because the oils from your hands can actually contaminate the disc brake pads if you touch them. Yes, they are that fragile. It's kind of crazy to think, but why would you want to replace your disc brake pads because they were contaminated and then contaminate them as you install the new ones? If you look on the box, you'll see this little R. That means that these are resin pads and that they are compatible with resin disc brake routers. The reason why that's important is because the resin pads are a little bit softer and less harsh. So if you use the standard metal pads, which I actually had on before, they will start to strip away at your router quicker, which is bad. So the mechanic that I had before, for some reason, installed metal ones. I don't know why, but now I'm gonna put in resin ones because that's what the correct compatibility requires. So let's open this up. And here we have the little clamp thing. Again, that's really standard. Put that away. And then we have, as you would expect, 2 brand new pads. And you can see that these don't have that streaks, those like black streaks on there. These are not contaminated and we want to keep them that way. When we are installing it, what we're going to do is take this clamp, line it up with the hole and line it up with the pad, And then you simply just do that on the other side too. And then you can see that they're all kind of lined up. And then our retaining pin is gonna go through that nest of holes. And that's what's gonna keep it in place. So before we can actually put the new brake pads in, we need to separate the pistons within the brakes to make sure that there's space for the new brake pads. And so I have a tool here that's a kind of a disc brake piston press spreading tool. Yes, there's a dedicated tool set for just this. So I'm gonna use this tool. You can also use a flathead screwdriver, or if you're out on a bike packing trip and you need to replace your disc brakes, you can use some tire levers if you wanted to. So simply you're just gonna take this pointy end piece, kind of gently shove it in here and push. And the key is to try to apply pressure very evenly, because you can break these things and that will be expensive, and you basically have to replace your whole disc brake system. So we got our pads all lined up like I showed, and now we're going to put these pads back in. The left side, of course, is going to go on the left side of the bike, and I got my gloves on here just to make sure I don't contaminate the pads. So as I showed before, there is this hole that needs to be lined up, and that's what the retaining pin is going to pass through. So just pinching here, I'm going to put this back in very gently. Again, a little bit of pressure and just sliding it in now. That was a bit tricky. Very gently popping that in. And now we're going to put the retaining pin back in. Now we're going to reinstall the retaining pin to kind of finish things up here, and you can see that there's this nice hole for us to pass the retaining pin through. Next here, we're going to reinstall the retaining pin. So like we did when we took it off, we're going to pass this pin through, gently push and make sure it comes through the other end. And then before we put in the little cotter pin piece, we're going to take our flathead, gently tighten this thing up. Do not be rough with anything here, it's relatively fragile. Tighten it till it's taut, but not too hard. And then take that retaining pin piece and reinstall it. You probably don't need the pliers when doing this. I'm saying that as I'm fumbling around. Maybe I will pull out the pliers, let's see. Oh, okay. Perfect, got it in there. Now I'm gonna show how to clean up your disc brake router to try to remove as much contamination as possible. So here we have some isopropyl alcohol, and we're gonna spray that onto this paper towel. I'll spray quite a bit. I recommend wearing gloves because that's just gonna keep one, contamination off your router from your hands, and two, prevent any issues with like the alcohol touching your hands and your skin. And then we're just gonna wipe and get in there pretty good. I'll probably put some more alcohol in here. So some people will actually use this method and then run fine sandpaper over the router. And that is simply to try to create a better surface for the new disc brake pads to grip onto. I'm not gonna do that. Maybe I'll show that in a future video. Okay, so I'm done that now. You can see how much oil I got off here. That's quite a bit. And this is ready to accept the new disc brake pads. And hopefully this will further remove the contamination and further improve the braking power as well as reduce the squeaking. So I put the wheel back on, and now it's time to try to bed in these brakes. So what we're gonna do is do a couple roundabouts on a hill, and this will just kind of take off that little bit of coating that's on your brakes when it comes out of the box, and make sure it's nice and safe for when you do have to brake. These brakes feel really nice, and I'm not getting that rubbing that you can get if they're misaligned, so I'm pretty happy about that too. All right, so I'm gonna go down this hill and then brake. Going in between the trees here just to make it a little bit more spicy.
But yeah, these feel awesome.
I hope that you managed to successfully install your brakes and that they're working safely with strong braking power and that they're quiet and not annoying. If you want to see more videos like this, please consider slapping the subscribe button. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.